what's happening here is not that English is taking over, English is not replacing other language.
I mean, how many people here speak 2 languages? Can you just put your hand up? That's all of you actually, because there's English as well. How many speak 3 languages? Including native. How many speak 4 languages? It's a smaller number, but there are still a couple of hands there. But you see, we may not be representative, but even within this group, there's a large number of people who have a large number of languages available to them. Now look within each of those languages. Do you use English in the same way to everyone? Do you use your native language in the same way to everyone? How does it change according to who you're communicating with? How does it change according to your context, where you're communicating? My point here is that even in somebody who speaks one language, they switch from one code to another according to who they're speaking to and their situation. Some situations are much more formal, and some situations are very informal. And you see different kinds of language used in those situations. So, dialect is involved, and code switching within one language. As I say, English does not necessarily dominate in that sense of kicking other languages out. It doesn't take over necessarily, it's addition. So most people now see that what they're doing is using different languages that might even be with the same people. When I was teaching English to medical scientists, when doing laboratory work, it would be quite common for my students to use English to talk about aspects of the laboratory experiment, but then immediately switch into Arabic to talk about something that was not directly involved with the experiment. So you get my students using English, Arabic, English, Arabic, English, Arabic all the time. Nobody worried about that. It was perfectly normal, different purposes, different languages, and they got on quite happily with that. And on that scale, if you enlarge it to the global scale, I think that's what's happening around the world to all of us these days. Is that, you remember the diagram with the native speakers in the central circle and the non-native speakers outside? This is now being reversed. In terms of English language teaching and learning, the important figure is the non-native speaker, not the native speaker. So people like me are receding into the background. I'll be cast aside and forgotten very soon. It's people like the non-native speakers who are becoming central to the ideas in English language teaching and learning. It's not completely happened yet, which is why I'm able to stand here quite happily, but it will be happening very soon. So we're looking to the future. This is one view of the future. David Graddle is quite well known. He's done a lot of work on predicting the future of English language teaching and language use, and this is what he said. Looking at Europe, he could see it. English spreading from the north of Europe, countries like Sweden, to the south, and leaving actually Ireland and the UK, the native-speaking countries, leaving them isolated, least multilingual of all the European countries. So they're becoming unusual, they're becoming abnormal, if you like. Monolingualism is not the norm anymore. The idea of a modern nation state with one national language, this will not continue. It will be expected that people will be able to use several languages for different purposes. point that language does vary. It depends on who you're talking to and what you want to use it for. Even within a language, it varies. So between languages, it also varies. Okay, and David Crystal, looking at language use. David Crystal, very well-known applied linguist. He's the patron of IATEFL as well, often speaks at IATEFL conferences, has one of the broadest and deepest knowledges of linguistics of anyone I've ever met. His ideas were that we normally have three aspects of language. The language we use at home, with family, with friends, which is very informal. It may be the local dialect, if you have dialects of your language, and certainly in English this happens. A friend of mine who I normally speak English to, and I always thought she was... So learning English in the country, it's thought to have economic benefits, but we can't prove it yet. However, there are big investments. Governments are spending a lot of money on educating people in language, and especially in English. On the basis of what? Well, it's on the basis of what we think to be economic benefits. But where are the results? This will be an interesting thing to look for in future years. I'm going to mention the CEFR. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that. It's the Common European Framework of Reference for languages. And it's a way of classifying what is taught and assessed in any language, from beginner level up to advanced level. This is what most national curricula within Europe are based on now, and this is spreading around the world. We've been working, Firouz and I, in Uzbekistan on this for some years now, for example. Now, most national curricula hope that their students will graduate at around about intermediate level. And in terms of the CEFR, that's about B1 or B2. That's the hope. After so many years of English teaching, for example, then we hope to graduate them at that intermediate level. And employers certainly want people speaking English, but it's noticed more recently that employers normally want somebody with either very good English or they can get by with basic English. The intermediate is not so much sought. They don't really want someone with just B1, they want someone with C1 or C2, someone with really good English. And the B1 is actually, well, it's a bit more than they need for the other end of the scale, the A1 and the A2. So there's a difference here, there's a dichotomy again. So whereas most graduates at the A's or the C's, most education systems are aimed at B1 and B2. We've got some detail there as well, which I won't get into. So, how do we find a level of thinking that method is too restrictive? It actually ties a teacher down too much. They're not free to do what they want with their students. But the model also is not the native speaker anymore. So we're looking at a situation where there is not one method which is promoted, and the native speaker is not the only model. Non-native speakers are also models. Various methods may be used, and we started talking about world Englishes rather than world English. Different varieties of English around the world, in other words. Okay. That's from that research. So the idea of doing this, I'm just going to have a little test here to see if you've been listening. What about that one? EAP. Academic purposes. I've already met several people who teach English for academic purposes. Okay. What about that one?
EFE.
English. No.
There's not necessarily one answer to this, so you can use your imagination. English for engineering. Yeah. As I say, you don't have to believe that this is the only meaning of this, but there is English for engineering. There are many courses English for engineers. EFL?
It's foreign language.
Right, you would normally say as a foreign language, but English for law as well. Any more?
Teaching English.
Well, there would be English for medicine, EFM, yes. English for nurses, EFN. English for aeronautical engineers, EFAE, and we can get very complicated about that. But what about this one? This one is not very serious. TENOR. T for
Teaching.
teaching, E for
English.
English, all right. Teaching English for...
Native. No.
Could be native.
No. No.
All right. Patience.
Nations.
Good quality of effective teachers. Patience.
No, obviously.
This is my joke. This is... Excuse me. This is what I really dislike about English teaching, when there is no reason to teach it. It's been put on the curriculum, students are expected to learn it, and they're expected to learn it in order to take an examination. No other reason. Quite a lot of administrations see it like this. But real language learning, as I'm sure we can agree, there's always a purpose to learning the language, and that's when it's best learnt. During the war, the British Army, many other armies around the world started teaching languages for obvious reasons. In the British Army, they taught many of their soldiers German. And it was very successful, the way that they taught it. It was the audiolingual method, a method, notice, just one method. They taught German to soldiers, and the soldiers learnt it very well and very quickly. Now, after the war, everyone said, oh, great, audiolingual, that's the way to teach language. We'll do it with everyone. And the results were not very good. Why? No purpose. The soldiers during the war were learning it to save their lives. After the war in schools, there was no purpose to it. It was not very effective. So, teaching English for no reason, to me, is not really encouraging students to learn anything. There has to be a purpose. Even within each of our classes, we need to have a purpose for what we're doing today. And the students have to accept that purpose and buy into it. Okay, so in my view, and I've talked to some people already about this, I don't think there's anything really effective called general English. I think every sort of English that's taught, any sort of language that's taught, needs a purpose to be effective. It's general, it gets lost in the air. It wafts around and doesn't do anything. But that's just me. You don't have to agree with me about this. Okay.
Regular text, no pictures, no graphics, nothing like that. That was typical in the 1950s. And the typical teaching book then, the textbook then, would be a heading, like we've got, what's the heading there? I can't quite see it from here. Yeah, they've got things like must have and have to, must have and have to. So we're given
a grammar point, we're given some explanation, we're given some examples, and then we have a number of discrete sentences to manipulate according to that grammar point. That was typical. Have you ever used something like this? You still see them, and you see the sons, daughters, granddaughters of these as well, in series like Murphy, the Murphy books, directly derived from this sort of thing. Now, they have their place. I'm not saying this is bad, but I'm saying it needs a particular context to be used. This is all I had when I was a beginning teacher. I had nothing else. No training, no ideas about how people learn. I was just given this and told to get on with it. So that was not very good for my students, I think. It was good for me because I learned a lot of lessons about how not to teach language. However, what about this? When I got back to Britain, I was given this as a textbook. Has anyone seen this one? Would you ever say, that is your mouth? Very unusual, I would think. I would have to think very hard of a context where this would be a useful saying. This is my mouth. Yes, you know, we could think of better ones than this. But your finger is on your arm. Again, you know, there'd have to be very strange context for that. So we can see, even in the 1930s, there was an attempt to make something true in language, but it wasn't quite working there. There was no real reflection of real life in it, in this example. There's another example there, where one of them is actually lying down. I take my foot off your head. As well, yes, they are, yeah. So we can see what they're teaching, and we could actually use this, because some of it could be quite funny. It could be good fun to use with students. But we must be careful about where's the real world here? You know, what real application does this have? And that's really why I'm showing you this, because at the back of everything I'm talking about is that in teaching and learning English language, and any language these days, you must always bear in mind, how is this going to be used in the real world? How can we give practice to students of using language in real situations in the real world? 1929, there was, you remember records? Gramophone records? There's a label there. There was a series produced on conversational English. Now, if you go to the internet, you can hear these. The URL is available. If you're interested, I can look it up as well. But if you go and find Vanguard to get their students to be autonomous learners, they're going to set up their students to be resourceful in future life, to take anything that is thrown at them and be successful. In order to do that, we have to promote autonomous learners, people who can go out and learn by themselves, especially in language-related activities. So you and I are becoming that kind of, I can say, stimulus for transaction, if you like. You get your students to be able to take any situation and make the most of it. As for the students, we don't know what they will have to do eventually. But in the same way, we want them to reflect on what they're doing and what we've been doing, and in the future world, they will be able to deal with anything themselves. So let's hope that's where we're going. In order to do that, remember, let's have a purpose. Why are we doing this? Is that clear? Is it clear to our students? Is it clear to us? So, have a good future. Let's hope your students have a good future. Let's be purposeful and let's progress all together in the right direction.